Immigration and Customs Enforcement has arrested 16 Hmong and Laotian immigrants in Detroit. And the story behind these arrests reveals one of the most complex and tragic chapters in American foreign policy. These aren't just random deportations. These are men from communities that literally bled for America in a war most Americans have never even heard of. We're talking about the secret war in Laos, a CIA operation that relied on Hmong soldiers to fight communist forces, while the U.S. officially stayed neutral. And now, decades later, their families are being torn apart by the very government they once served. What we're witnessing today is part of something much larger. Immigration attorneys are calling this the most aggressive enforcement action in modern American history.
The ultimatum is simple, brutal, and unprecedented in its scope. Leave voluntarily or face detention and deportation. But here's what nobody saw coming. This is not just another campaign promise. This is happening right now, and the machinery behind it is more complex and far-reaching than anyone imagined. August 9th, 2025, marked a turning point that immigration attorneys are calling the most aggressive enforcement action in modern American history. Sources within the Department of Homeland Security suggest that what we are witnessing is not just policy enforcement, it is a complete transformation of how America handles immigration. The question everyone is asking is not whether this will change the country, but how dramatically and how fast. According to CNN,
the scope of what's happening goes far beyond Detroit. Federal agents are conducting operations nationwide, and the methods they're using are raising serious concerns. In places like North Hollywood, agents detained approximately 20 people outside a Home Depot, including day laborers who were simply looking for work. Witnesses captured cell phone footage showing detained individuals being walked through parking lots by armed federal agents and placed into vehicles. By summoning people to routine check-ins and then arresting them, ICE has found a way to detain people without going to their homes.
According to the National Day Labor Organizing Network, also known as Endalon, at least 20 people were detained outside in this parking lot in front of the Home Depot this morning. We do have video we want to show you. This was shared by a witness who was here and saw this all unfold. You can see what appears to be a person detained being walked through the lot by a federal agent. Then a car pulls up, and that person is placed inside. This happened around 9:30 this morning. You can see in the cell phone video federal agents that appear to be armed standing next to their truck as people are gathering video, and there's also what appears to be protesters standing outside on the other side of this fence. As these immigration operations continue, especially at local Home Depots,
the human impact of these operations is devastating. Take Brian Gavidia, a 29-year-old U.S. citizen from Montebello, who became a plaintiff in an ACLU lawsuit after being detained by federal immigration agents. Despite being an American citizen, Gavidia was pushed against a wall and had his phone and ID confiscated. He describes the traumatic encounter where federal agents demanded proof of citizenship, and he expresses his belief that he was racially profiled, attacked because I was walking while brown.
We the People has been on 29-year-old Brian Gavidia's back for 6 years, but it wasn't until this moment that he says made him really understand what it meant.
Every time I see it on video, it just it's like a bad memory in my brain, 100%.
Agents were conducting an operation outside his shop on June 12th.
I just went to go look. Honestly, did not know it was a crime to go look.
The video shows one agent pushing Brian up against the wall and demanding he prove his citizenship.
I truly believe I was a target because of my race. I believe I was racially profiled. I believe I was attacked because I was walking while brown.
He says agents held him, took his phone and real ID that proved he was a citizen.
But to understand why the Detroit arrests are particularly significant, we need to understand who these men are and where they come from. 15 of the 16 men received official letters from ICE, telling them to report to the Detroit field office for what they believed were routine check-ins. These weren't people hiding from authorities. They'd been checking in with ICE for years, sometimes decades. Many had deportation orders dating back to the early 2000s, but Laos historically refused to accept deportees, leaving them in immigration limbo. Then something changed. This time, when they showed up for their appointments, they were immediately detained and transported to facilities in northwestern Michigan, then shipped to detention centers in Louisiana and Texas. The 16th man was arrested at his workplace in Lansing. According to ICE, all 16 had criminal histories that made them eligible for deportation. The agency described them as including a known gang member who obstructed a murder investigation, multiple child sex abusers, drug traffickers, and other Laotian nationals with criminal histories. But their families tell a very different story. Anissa Lee's father, Sufeng Yang, was among those arrested. She describes him as the backbone of my family and the source of strength for over 53 nieces and nephews. According to Lee, if you count everyone whose lives Yang has touched, there are over 300 people who would be devastated by his deportation. Yang came to the U.S. as a young child with his mother, seeking safety after the war. ICE says he has a robbery conviction from Toledo, Ohio, and has had an outstanding deportation order since 2007. What makes this situation so complicated is that Yang, like many of those detained, was born in a refugee camp in Thailand. He's never actually been to Laos. Neither have many of the others facing deportation. They were born stateless in camps after their families fled the communist takeover that followed America's withdrawal from Southeast Asia. State Representative Mai Xiong, Michigan's first Hmong American legislator, put it bluntly. Many of the detainees had never been to Laos, having been born in refugee camps in other countries, or had been brought to the U.S. as children. This raises a fundamental question about deportation policy. How do you deport someone to a country they've never lived in, whose language they might not speak, and where they have no family or connections? The answer lies in the massive infrastructure being built for these operations. The administration has revealed plans to reopen Guantanamo Bay detention camp to hold potentially tens of thousands of immigrants.
Wikipedia reports that the administration has ordered the reopening of the Guantanamo Bay detention camp to hold potentially tens of thousands of immigrants. The logistical and legal difficulties of using Guantanamo as an immigrant detention facility are immense. But sources suggest the administration is committed to making it work. The symbolism alone has sent shockwaves through the international community. What immigration experts find most concerning is not just the scope of the enforcement, but the speed. The White House issued an executive order on January 21, 2025, titled Protecting the American People Against Invasion, establishing it as policy to faithfully execute immigration laws against all inadmissible and removable aliens. The language itself represents a shift in how the administration frames immigration, not as a humanitarian issue, but as a national security threat. The economic implications are staggering. Industries that have relied on immigrant labor for generations are facing worker shortages that some economists are calling catastrophic. Agriculture, construction, hospitality, and healthcare are all reporting significant disruptions.
The scale of funding for these operations is unprecedented. ICE has received a $46 billion allocation for deportations, making it the largest federal law enforcement agency in U.S. history.
$46 billion. That is how much cash Trump just funneled into the largest deportation machine in American history. According to CNN, ICE just received what experts are calling a historic windfall of enforcement money. But here is the shocking part. NBC News reported that despite arresting the most people in 5 years, deportations are still lagging behind Trump's promises. The American Immigration Council revealed something even more stunning. This budget makes ICE the single largest federal law enforcement agency in the history of the nation.
New facilities are being constructed across the country. At Fort Bliss, the new Camp East Montana facility, nicknamed the Lone Star Lockup, is set to house up to 1,000 detainees. Senator John Cornyn has clarified who will be housed there, emphasizing that it will hold criminal aliens, individuals with criminal charges or convictions who have exhausted all legal remedies. He specifically states these are not ordinary workers like gardeners or housekeepers, but rather up to 1,290 individuals with criminal backgrounds who have pending deportation orders.
Talking about as many as 291,000 individuals who are called criminal aliens, who are people either with criminal charges pending or criminal convictions, and who have exhausted all of their legal remedies. In other words, there's no due process issue involved here. These are people who basically didn't show up.
But to understand why the Hmong and Laotian communities are being targeted, we need to understand what happened during the Secret War and why these communities ended up in America in the first place. The Secret War in Laos ran from 1961 to 1975, and it was the largest covert operation in CIA history. While America was fighting the public Vietnam War, it was simultaneously running a shadow conflict in neighboring Laos. The problem was that Laos was supposed to be neutral under the 1962 Geneva Accords, so the CIA couldn't officially be there. Instead, they recruited an army of local fighters, primarily Hmong tribesmen from the mountainous regions of northern Laos. The Hmong were perfect for this role. They knew the terrain, they had their own grievances against the communist Pathet Lao, and they needed weapons and support to defend their villages. The CIA promised them that if they fought for America, America would take care of them. General Vang Pao, a charismatic Hmong military leader, became the face of this operation. Under his command, tens of thousands of Hmong men and boys, some as young as 11, joined what became known as the Secret Army. These weren't professional soldiers. They were farmers, village leaders, teenagers who left their families to fight a war that most of the world didn't even know was happening. They rescued downed American pilots, disrupted supply lines, and tied down North Vietnamese forces that would otherwise have been deployed in South Vietnam. The CIA supplied them through Air America, a front company that ran hundreds of flights daily to remote airstrips carved out of jungle mountainsides. For 14 years, the Hmong fought and died for American objectives in a war that officially didn't exist. Then in 1975, everything collapsed. When the U.S. withdrew from Southeast Asia, the Hmong were left behind to face the consequences. The communist Pathet Lao took power and immediately began hunting down anyone who had collaborated with the Americans. The Hmong were branded as traitors, CIA puppets, enemies of the state. What followed was systematic persecution. Hmong villages were destroyed, leaders were executed, and entire communities were forced to flee into the jungle. Thousands died in the initial purges. Thousands more died trying to escape to Thailand, crossing the Mekong River on makeshift rafts, while being hunted by government forces. Those who made it to Thai refugee camps faced years of uncertainty, living in overcrowded facilities while waiting for countries to accept them for resettlement. The lucky ones eventually made it to the United States, France, Australia, or other Western nations. But even in America, their struggles weren't over. Many arrived with nothing, no education, no English, no understanding of American society. They were refugees from a war that America preferred to forget. Generations grew up in American cities like Detroit, Minneapolis, and Fresno, trying to build new lives while carrying the trauma of displacement and loss. Some succeeded brilliantly, becoming doctors, teachers, business owners, and even state legislators like Mai Xiong. Others struggled with poverty, cultural displacement, and the psychological scars of war and exile. Some turned to crime, the criminal histories that ICE now uses to justify deportation. But here's the crucial context that gets lost in enforcement statistics. These communities were created by American foreign policy. Their presence in the U.S. is a direct result of their service to American interests. The trauma, displacement, and social problems that followed are consequences of decisions made in Washington, not character flaws inherent to Hmong and Laotian people. So why is this happening now? Why are deportations suddenly accelerating after decades of relative stability? The answer lies in changing policies both in the U.S. and in Laos. For years, Laos refused to issue travel documents for deportees, effectively protecting its diaspora from forced return. But that changed under pressure from the Trump administration, which threatened visa sanctions against countries that wouldn't cooperate with deportations. In June 2025, the U.S. placed a partial travel ban on Laos, cutting off visas for certain Lao individuals and citing failure to cooperate with U.S. deportation policy. The pressure worked. According to Moa Her, a consular officer at the Lao Embassy in Washington, the embassy has issued travel documents for 145 U.S. deportees to be accepted in Laos since the beginning of 2025, compared to typically about 10 per year historically. This represents a massive acceleration in deportations, and it's not just happening in Michigan. Similar arrests have been reported in Minnesota, where 15 Hmong men were detained in July 2025. The Department of Homeland Security has been publicizing these arrests on social media, posting photos of detained men in handcuffs with their names, ages, and criminal convictions. Immigration advocates say this treatment is deliberately dehumanizing, designed to strip away the context and history that might generate sympathy. The posts refer to the men as illegal aliens and criminal illegal alien sexual predators, language that erases their identity as former U.S. allies and refugees. But the families of those detained see something very different. They see fathers, grandfathers, community leaders being torn away from families who depend on them. Maia Xiong, whose husband Wa Konglor was among those detained, said this appeared to be a targeted operation, an easy way for ICE officers to detain people. She's right. By summoning people to routine check-ins and then arresting them, ICE avoided the complications of home raids while ensuring high compliance. People showed up voluntarily, trusting a system they'd been working with for decades. The human cost is devastating. In one case reported from Minnesota, a father was arrested in front of his 3 young children, leaving them unsupervised until neighbors could step in. Families are scrambling to understand where their relatives are being held and when they might be deported. Many are afraid to speak publicly, worried that attention might make things worse. But some, like Anissa Lee, are speaking out anyway. My husband, like many others that day, was taken without warning, said Maia Xiong in a statement read at a Detroit press conference. The fear in these communities is palpable and justified. For those facing deportation, return to Laos isn't just inconvenient, it could be deadly. Many of those detained have been active in Hmong veteran advocacy groups in America, working to gain recognition for their service and benefits for their communities. This activism makes them visible targets if returned to a country where their collaboration with the CIA is still seen as treason. Ann Vu, wife of detained Hmong veteran Lue Yang, put it starkly. With Lu's public advocacy here in America for our Hmong veterans and our Hmong American people today significantly increases that he will be identified and persecuted upon arrival. He will receive a death sentence. This isn't hyperbole. The Laotian government has never reconciled with those who fought against it during the Secret War. 28 Michigan legislators have signed a letter calling for the immediate release of the Detroit detainees. They argue that these men have deep roots in American communities, families who depend on them, and face genuine persecution if returned to Laos. But ICE operates under federal authority, and local pressure has limited impact on immigration enforcement decisions. The agency maintains that it's simply enforcing existing deportation orders against individuals with criminal convictions. From ICE's perspective, these are routine law enforcement actions against people who have already been ordered removed from the country. But this perspective ignores the broader historical context and the specific vulnerabilities of these communities. It treats decades-old criminal convictions as permanent disqualifications for American residents, regardless of rehabilitation, family ties, or service to the country. It ignores the fact that many of these men were children when they committed the crimes that now justify their deportation. And it ignores the role that trauma, displacement, and inadequate support played in creating the conditions that led to criminal behavior in the first place. The timing of these deportations also raises questions about priorities and resources. With limited detention space and enforcement budgets, ICE has to make choices about whom to target. Why focus on aging Hmong and Laotian men with decades-old convictions rather than recent arrivals or individuals posing current public safety threats? The answer seems to be pragmatic rather than strategic. These cases are easier to process now that Laos is cooperating with deportations. But ease of deportation shouldn't be the primary factor in enforcement decisions. The broader pattern here reflects a fundamental shift in how America treats its former allies and the communities created by its foreign interventions. During the Cold War, accepting refugees from communist countries was seen as both a humanitarian obligation and a propaganda victory. It demonstrated American values and undermined enemy claims about Western abandonment of allies. But that geopolitical context no longer exists. Today's immigration enforcement operates in a different framework, one focused on numerical targets and criminal history rather than historical relationships or moral obligations. This shift has profound implications beyond the Hmong and Laotian communities. America's credibility with current and future allies depends partly on how it treats those who have already served American interests. If the message is that collaboration with the U.S. provides no long-term protection, that America will abandon its allies when convenient, then future recruitment of local partners becomes more difficult. Why would anyone risk their lives for a country that might deport their children decades later? The secret war veterans themselves remain largely unrecognized by the American government. Despite their service under CIA command, they're not considered U.S. military veterans and don't qualify for veterans benefits. Efforts to change this have stalled in Congress for years, so these men served America in war, received no recognition for that service, struggled with the consequences of displacement and trauma, and now face deportation based on criminal convictions that may have resulted from inadequate support and integration assistance. Meanwhile, the communities they're being torn from have become integral parts of American society. Michigan is home to over 7,000 Hmong people and 4,000 Laotians, according to the 2020 census. These aren't isolated immigrant enclaves. They're woven into the economic and social fabric of their communities. State Representative Mai Xiong represents not just Hmong interests, but the broader Warren district that elected her. The families facing separation have deep roots, with children and grandchildren who are American citizens. What makes this situation particularly tragic is that it was avoidable. If the U.S. had provided adequate support for Hmong and Laotian refugees in the 1980s and 1990s, better integration services, trauma counseling, economic opportunities, fewer might have ended up with the criminal convictions that now justify their deportation. If Congress had recognized secret war veterans and provided them with appropriate benefits, their communities might have been more stable and prosperous. If immigration law provided more flexibility for people with deep community ties and unique historical circumstances, families wouldn't be facing separation after decades of American residence. Instead, we have a system that creates problems through inadequate policy and then punishes people for the consequences of those problems. It's a pattern that reflects broader failures in how America handles the long-term consequences of its foreign interventions. Whether in Southeast Asia, Central America, Iraq, or Afghanistan, the U.S. has repeatedly created refugee populations and then struggled with the domestic political consequences of accepting and integrating them. The Detroit arrests also highlight the human cost of immigration enforcement that focuses on statistics rather than individual circumstances. ICE can report 16 successful deportations of individuals with criminal histories, but behind those statistics are 16 families being torn apart, hundreds of community members living in fear, and a betrayal of promises made during wartime. The agency's social media posts celebrating these arrests as victories against criminal, illegal aliens erase the complexity and tragedy of these cases. For the Hmong and Laotian communities, these deportations represent a continuation of the abandonment they experienced in 1975. Once again, America is walking away from its obligations to people who served American interests. Once again, they're left to face the consequences of decisions made in Washington. The only difference is that this time, the abandonment is happening in American cities rather than Southeast Asian jungles. The families fighting these deportations face an uphill battle. Immigration law provides few avenues for relief once a final deportation order has been issued. Even if they can demonstrate rehabilitation, community ties, and potential persecution upon return, the legal system offers limited flexibility. Their best hope may be political intervention, pressure on ICE to use prosecutorial discretion, or congressional action to provide relief for secret war veterans and their families. But such relief requires public awareness and political will. And that's complicated by the fact that most Americans know little about the secret war or the communities it created. The war was secret by design, and it has remained largely hidden from American historical memory. Most high school students learn about Vietnam, but not about Laos. Most Americans don't know that their government recruited child soldiers to fight a covert war, or that those children are now grandfathers facing deportation. The story of the Detroit arrests is ultimately a story about the long-term consequences of American foreign policy and the moral obligations that survive changes in geopolitical priorities. It's about what America owes to those who served its interests, even when that service is inconvenient to remember. And it's about whether the United States will honor the promises it made to allies during the Cold War, or whether those promises expire when they become politically or administratively inconvenient. As these 16 men sit in detention centers in Louisiana and Texas, waiting for travel documents that will send them to a country many have never seen, their families and communities are grappling with a fundamental question. What does it mean to be an American ally? If service to American interests during wartime doesn't provide protection from deportation decades later, if refugee status can be revoked based on old criminal convictions, if promises of sanctuary can be broken when convenient, then what value does American partnership really have? These questions extend far beyond the Hmong and Laotian communities. They speak to America's credibility as an ally and its commitment to the people who risk everything to serve American interests around the world. The answers will be found not just in immigration courts and detention centers, but in how American society chooses to remember its history and honor its obligations to those who served in wars most Americans prefer to forget. The secret war in Laos ended nearly 50 years ago, but its consequences continue to unfold in American communities today. The 16 men detained in Detroit are living reminders of a conflict that shaped Southeast Asia and created refugee communities around the world. Their fate will determine whether America's promises to its allies have any lasting meaning, or whether they're just temporary conveniences to be discarded when geopolitical priorities change. For their families, their communities, and America's future allies, the stakes couldn't be higher.